What if your dream honeymoon turned into a headline scandal, and the one person you tried to erase from your past was already waiting with your future in her hands? At the edge of paradise, love, money, and revenge are about to collide. The tropical wind drifted softly across the edge of a private landing strip, where the polished engines of a platinum jet purred in their final moments. First to descend was Adrian Colburn, already masked behind dark sunglasses, shielding his eyes from the searing glow of the Tahitian sun, stretching over the lush horizon like a golden veil. Just behind him came Celeste, descending like she belonged on a red carpet, not a runway. Her ivory silk dress clung like destiny, and her stilettos clicked with purpose. One manicured hand clung to Adrian's arm, her glossy smile shining with the smug delight of a woman convinced she'd finally won. The air was heavy and rich salt, hibiscus, and the sweet sting of new beginnings. A glossy obsidian SUV idled at the foot of the stairs. The driver leapt out to open the door, nodding respectfully. Adrian ignored him, adjusted the cuff of his designer watch, and sank into the back seat without a glance. Celeste followed effortlessly, her legs crossing like second nature before the door clicked shut. "Welcome to Eden, Mrs. Colburn," Adrian murmured with a knowing grin, brushing a strand of her golden hair behind one ear. Celeste giggled, kissing his cheek as her fingers danced across her phone screen. "I could get used to this," she said. "They re-expecting us, right?" Adrian scoffed. "Of course. Oceanfront villa, private pool, champagne chilled. I don't leave anything to chance." Palm trees blurred past as they wound through the island roads. At last, the resort appeared like a dream surfacing from mist. White buildings tumbled down the hill like cascading steps of luxury, embraced by emerald gardens and infinity pools that disappeared into the sea. As they entered the grand lobby, a wash of cool air wrapped around them like money well spent. The marble beneath their feet glowed beneath chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations. Behind a polished counter, a row of uniformed staff stood stiffly, their gazes avoiding direct contact. Adrian moved with the quiet arrogance of a man accustomed to obedience. Celeste trailed beside him, all elegance and sparkle designer shades, flawless skin, diamonds flashing like warnings. This, he thought, was the reward. Young, obedient, grateful. Everything his former wife had grown tired of pretending to be. "Colburn, Adrian Colburn. Presidential villa," he announced with a tap of his finger on the granite counter. The concierge hesitated. "Just a moment, sir." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "It's already paid for. I made the booking myself." "This is our honeymoon," Adrian said firmly. "Of course, sir," the concierge replied smoothly. "I just need to confirm a few details with our general manager. If you'd like to relax in the lounge, we'll handle everything promptly." The tension was almost invisible, but it crawled beneath Adrian's skin like static. He didn't like inefficiency, and he especially didn't like waiting. Celeste, oblivious to the change in tone, was already posing in front of a hibiscus-lined wall, snapping selfies and flooding her stories with captions like #JustMarried and #honeymoon vibes. Adrian sat stiffly, jaw clenched, watching the concierge whisper into a phone behind the desk. No one offered a welcome drink. No apologies. Just silence and delay. 10 minutes passed. Adrian stood abruptly. "Is there a problem?" The concierge stood straighter. "Our general manager will be with you shortly, sir. She'll assist you personally." "Fantastic," Adrian muttered, beginning to pace. "Let's us see how long she keeps this job." A door behind a frosted glass panel eased open. The sharp, rhythmic sound of heels echoed across the marble floor. Adrian turned and froze. The woman approaching wore a midnight blue sheath dress. Her dark hair pulled into a low, elegant bun. She moved with quiet precision, her posture unyielding. There was no haste in her stride, no hint of nervousness. She walked as though every inch of the lobby belonged to her. Caroline. Adrian blinked, his voice barely a whisper. There she stood, his ex-wife calm, composed, clipboard in hand. Her presence was like cold water to the face, clear, unflinching, unbothered. Adrian, she said with a polite nod, as if they were old classmates crossing paths at a high society gala. Didn't expect to see you so soon. She turned slightly, arms open to the room. Welcome to Villa Estrada. Celeste finally looked up from her phone. Who is she? Adrian hesitated, just a beat. This is Caroline, my ex-wife. Caroline gave Celeste a subtle once-over. And you must be the new Mrs. Colburn. Her gaze landed briefly on the wedding ring, then returned to Celeste. Eyes, measured, unflinching, like she was appraising a painting she'd seen before. Congratulations, she said, her tone neutral. Celeste offered a thin smile, unsure whether she'd just been flattered or slapped. Thanks, she murmured. Adrian cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. What's going on here? You work here now? Caroline's lips curved, just slightly. No, Adrian. I don't work here. I own it, he stared at her. You own the resort? She flipped her clipboard, showing him the letterhead. The name across the top, Carolyn W. Colburn, Managing Director. Sleek serif font. A final stamp, a full stop. Celeste blinked in disbelief. Wait, she owns the place? Like, actually owns it? Caroline nodded. That's correct. Now, she continued, flipping through a packet of documents, about your reservation, there's a matter I need to speak with you about privately. Adrian narrowed his eyes. We booked a suite. It's confirmed. It's paid for. Yes, Caroline said, still calm. However, the payment raised a red flag in our system. Celeste gasped. You're kidding. That's absurd. Caroline looked directly at Adrian. Our finance department flagged the transaction. The wire originated from an account that, according to our most recent legal filing, was still classified as a joint marital asset. She let that sink in before continuing. Since your divorce wasn't finalized until after the payment was made and the funds hadn't yet been divided, legally, there's an issue. Adrian's face turned red. You were reaching. I am simply enforcing the law, Caroline said evenly, her tone calm but razor sharp. You see, Adrian, when you used money from our joint investment account to pay for a luxury honeymoon without disclosing it during the asset division, that is considered concealment, possibly even fraud. You wouldn't, Adrian said, his voice tight. I already have. Celeste rose slowly, instinctively stepping back. Is that true? She whispered to him. Adrian didn't answer. Caroline extended a folder toward him. Inside, printed statements, highlighted transactions, a copy of their divorce settlement, and a paper trail of emails. Until this is resolved, she continued, your reservation is canceled. Your account access has been frozen by court order. You can do this. Oh, but I have, Caroline said. Celeste? Expression twisted. So, what now? We're just... What, homeless? On our honeymoon? Caroline turned toward the front desk. Please escort Mr. Colburn and his guest to the private car. They'll be departing shortly. Adrian opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, a flash of light burst through the lobby windows. Then another. Reporters, microphones, cameras. A sea of press surged toward the glass like a wave of judgment. Someone had tipped them off. Adrian turned toward the chaos, his blood running cold. Behind him, Caroline walked away, her steps calm and deliberate as she disappeared behind the same door she had entered from leaving a storm in her place. Celeste grabbed her bag with shaking hands. You said this was all yours. You said we were set. Adrian had no answer. None that wouldn't unravel everything. The reporters were already flooding inside, voices rising, questions flying. The tropical heat outside was nothing compared to the blaze burning beneath Adrian's skin. He had come to this island to begin a new life, but the story was no longer his to write. What would you do if your ex ruined your honeymoon in front of the entire world? Would you stand your ground or run, like his new bride? If this story has you hooked, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Every bit of love helps us keep bringing these wild, true-to-life dramas right to your screen. The ride away from Villa Estrada was silent, thick, the kind of silence that hums just before a thunderstorm. Adrian tapped his fingers against the door armrest, eyes blank as the SUV rolled down a palm-lined road away from the cliffside dream he thought he controlled. Next to him, Celeste sat with her arms folded tight, her expression hidden behind oversized sunglasses. But he didn't need to see her eyes to know what was coming. Her breathing was short, sharp, angry, each exhale like a lit fuse. Still, she said nothing. They weren't taken to another five-star villa, not even a hotel. The driver brought them to a modest guest house near the edge of town, beige walls, creaking ceiling fan, no chilled champagne, no sweeping ocean view, just silence and consequence. The concierge had explained, apologetically, that it was the only suite left in the area due to a local festival. Adrian hadn't believed him. This had Caroline written all over it. The moment the door shut, Adrian slammed the bedroom door behind him. Celeste stood in the center of the room, looking around like a wild cat in unfamiliar territory. Finally, she spoke. "Are you going to explain what just happened?" Her voice was low. Dangerous. Adrian didn't turn. He stood at the small window, staring out at a cracked parking lot. "It's nothing," he said. "She is bitter. She wants attention." Celeste let out a dry, bitter laugh, tossing her designer bag onto the couch. She didn't look bitter. She looked like a woman who knows exactly what she wants. She crossed her arms. "And she hasn't lost anything, Adrian. Not yet." Adrian spun around, frustration crackling through his voice. "This resort thing? It's a stunt. She can actually hold on to it. I know Caroline. She's not some mogul. She is not built for this." Celeste raised a brow. "You sure about that?" "'Cause from where I was standing, she looked pretty damn in control. Staff hanging on her every word. Paperwork locked down. She even had the media waiting." Adrian said nothing. He yanked off his jacket and threw it across the bed. The silence that followed was thick, charged, uncomfortable. Celeste finally sat down and scrolled through her phone. A few moments later, she let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "What?" Adrian asked. "She's trending," Celeste muttered. "Your ex-wife." She held up the screen. The hashtag read, "Caroline come back." A short clip had gone viral. Caroline standing tall, voice even, saying, "Your reservation was canceled on ethical grounds." Her jaw was tight, her expression composed. The caption underneath, "No woman should have to watch her life fund another honeymoon." Adrian stared, jaw tense, eyes narrowing. "She called the press," he said under his breath. "She knew I was coming. She waited until I walked in, then pulled the trigger." Celeste didn't respond. She was already deep into the comments, watching more clips, reading the reactions. The world was siding with Caroline. Sympathy flooded in like warm applause. Adrian, painted as the villain, a manipulator, a cheat, a symbol of everything people loved to hate. "She is being called a role model," Celeste said, voice laced with something sharp. They were calling her bold, dignified, inspirational. Adrian sat down, his energy draining. This wasn't supposed to happen. Celeste let out another bitter laugh. You are right. This was supposed to be our honeymoon. You told me everything was taken care of, that you were the king of details. I was. I am, Adrian snapped. I didn't think she'd outsmart you? Celeste cut in. Yeah, but she did. In public. He shot her a look, but she didn't flinch. Her warmth was gone. That adoring newlywed glow evaporated. Adrian wasn't he surprised. He knew who he'd married. Celeste liked power, status, comfort. And when those disappeared, so did her patience. I will fix this, he said quietly. I hope so, she replied, standing and heading toward the bathroom, because I didn't come all this way to be background noise in your ex-wife's revenge story. The door clicked shut behind her. Adrian waited a beat, then pulled out his phone. Lawyer voicemail. Bank accounts frozen. Resort, no answer. Finally, he called Caroline. To his surprise, she picked up. Hello, Adrian? Her voice was measured. Not cold, not warm, just neutral. I want to talk. Privately. That's what we were doing now. No, in person. A pause. Then, tomorrow, 10 o'clock, my office. She hung up before he could answer. The next morning, Adrian dressed in his best linen shirt and slacks, trying to project calm. Celeste didn't come. She'd claimed a headache and booked herself a spa day, paid in cash. So, he went alone. The drive back to Villa Estra was short, but every turn of the road felt like he was spiraling deeper into something he no longer controlled. When he arrived, the staff at the front desk greeted him with professional detachment. No smiles, no Mr. Colburn, no special treatment, just a man on the guest list, a man with a problem. He was quietly led through the halls toward the corner office. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows that opened up to the endless blue of the sea. Sunlight danced across polished floors, but the air inside was cool, controlled. Carolyn stood behind a minimalist black desk, flipping through folders with quiet precision. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, she simply gestured to the chair across from her. Adrian sat, stiffly. You've made your point, he said. Caroline didn't smile. This isn't about making a point. Really? Because from where I was standing, it looked pretty damn orchestrated. I warned you not to cross any lines during the divorce, she replied, her voice still composed. You did anyway. I didn't think you'd come after me like this. That's the problem, Adrian. You didn't think. She moved around the desk, leaning casually against its edge, arms folded, posture calm but immovable. You used money from our shared assets to pay for a wedding, a ring, and a luxury vacation with the woman you cheated on me with. Did you honestly believe there wouldn't be consequences? She wasn't the reason we split, he shot back. We were already falling apart. She wasn't to the cause, Caroline agreed. She was just the proof that it was long overdue. He stared at her, searching her face for something anger, pain, satisfaction, but she was unreadable. That somehow made it worse. I didn't come here to fight, Adrian said. I came to work this out. Then admit you were wrong. Sign a formal statement acknowledging the misuse of funds. Agree to a new settlement. Caroline's voice was calm. One that reflects reality, he scoffed. You are bleeding me dry. No, she said quietly. I'm taking back what's mine. Adrian stood. You planned this. All of it. I plan to protect myself, she replied. That's what women do when men like you underestimate them. He paused at the door, voice low. The press? That was protection too, wasn't it? Caroline tilted her head, her eyes sharp. That was power. Something you never thought I'd learn how to use. Adrian said nothing more. He left the office in silence. Outside, the sunlight struck him like a slap. It was too bright, too much. He squinted into it, like someone who'd just emerged from a dark, buried place. His phone buzzed again. More headlines, more photos, more shame. His name now synonymous with scandal, misconduct, Fraud. Back at the guest house, Celeste was zipping her suitcase. "You're leaving?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Your accounts are frozen. The resort won't accept your card. And I don't do budget hotels." "You're serious?" She snapped the case shut. "You wanted a young, fun wife? Well, here's the truth. Girls like me, we come for the perks. If the perks are gone, so are we." Adrian stood there, frozen, as she slipped on her sunglasses and walked out without a backward glance. No goodbye. No second thought. Just the soft click of the door behind her. He sank down on the edge of the bed, hands on his head. He could almost hear Caroline's voice from years ago, calm and sure. "One day, your ego is going to bury you." He just hadn't expected her to be standing at the edge of the pit, watching him fall. And yet, something told him this wasn't over. Not yet. The guest house walls felt closer now, like the room itself was shrinking. Adrian leaned forward on the narrow mattress, elbows on knees, hands clutching the back of his neck. His shirt clung to him, not from the heat, but from the weight of everything he'd lost in 48 hours. Outside, the buzzing of cicadas was interrupted by the occasional honk. The whir of scooters, life going on without him. Inside, silence. And the sour scent of lemon-scented cleaner and worn fabric. It was supposed to be a layover, a short detour on the path to paradise. Now it felt like exile. His phone buzzed again. He lunged for it, hope flickering his lawyer. The bank? The call he'd been waiting for, finally. He snatched the phone up, heart pounding. It wasn't the bank. It was another headline. Ex-wife outsmarts millionaire in legal meltdown at Island Resort. Mistress bride walks out as paradise turns against groom Caroline Colburn. Shuts down. Fraud on his own honeymoon day. Adrian hurled the phone onto the bed. It bounced off the thin mattress and landed with a dull thud. He shot up, pacing the narrow room, the worn floor creaking beneath every step. There wasn't even enough space to walk a straight line. He pressed a hand to the doorframe, then to his temple, as if the walls themselves were laughing at him. Adrian Colburn, once the golden boy of high finance. A man who had owned the room, closed billion-dollar deals over dinner, flown with the elite, and toasted with kings, was now pacing in a faded guest house. With a flickering ceiling fan and no wife, Celeste was gone. Her perfume still hung in the air, sweet, artificial, a whisper of what used to be hers and what was never really his. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a hotel staffer in a tan uniform holding a slim envelope. "Mr. Colburn," the man said, politely but flatly, "this was dropped off for you." Adrian nodded, taking the envelope without a word. The man didn't wait for a tip. He tore it open. Inside were formal legal documents, neatly bound and heavy with implications. At the top, a letter from his attorney. Relief flickered then vanished. Effective immediately, all joint marital assets are to be frozen, pending legal review of unauthorized financial activity. His eyes flew down the page, scanning for lifelines. But the language hit like a hammer. Embezzlement, fraudulent misappropriation, civil liability. He blinked, his brain refusing to accept what his eyes had already confirmed. How had Caroline moved this fast? How had she leveraged so much control? There were already depositions scheduled, statements to be submitted, hearings in motion. He would need to fly back, hire a PR team, call in every favor he'd ever earned. Anything to prevent his name from becoming another cautionary tale. The mogul who lost everything in paradise. He flipped further. Highlighted bank statements, itemized charges. Every expense tied to the honeymoon was there in black and white, the private jet, the 5-figure ring, the pre-wedding spa packages for Celeste, even the deposit for the suite at Villa Estra. All of it funded from accounts still linked to the marital estate. Every swipe, every transfer traceable. And now, weaponized. Adrian had always assumed the details didn't matter. That's what lawyers were for. He'd have built his life on the backs of people who cleaned up after him. But now, no one was picking up. He walked to the nightstand and flipped open his laptop. Maybe there's still time to get ahead of this. A press release. A public statement. Maybe spin it. He'd say it was a misunderstanding. That the accounts were in transition. That he didn't understand the post-divorce restrictions. Paint himself as a victim of outdated laws, legal ambiguity, something. He opened his browser. Locked. His email account locked. His investment dashboard locked. He tried another platform. Access denied. He went to his personal banking app, fingers trembling. Typed in his credentials. Loading. Balance. Zero downtown. He stared. No, he whispered. He refreshed the screen. Again and again, as if something would magically change, as if numbers might suddenly reappear. But the screen didn't lie. It was gone. All of it. And in that quiet, flickering room, with no one left to call and nothing left to spend, Adrian Colburn stood face to face with something he'd never truly felt before: powerlessness. Caroline hadn't just humiliated him. She had dismantled him piece by piece, quietly and methodically, while the world watched and applauded. Adrian dropped back onto the edge of the narrow bed, head in his hands, as the realization fully settled. She hadn't just taken his money. She'd taken his power. Later that afternoon, he forced himself outside, telling himself the air might help. But he hadn't walked far before two tourists spotted him. "Hey, aren't you the guy? Caroline SX?" one of them called out, grinning as he raised his phone to record. Adrian didn't answer. He turned, walking faster, heart pounding, nearly breaking into a run. Back in the room, he slammed the door, pulled the curtain shut tight, and stood there in the dim light, breathing heavily. He hated this feeling, the feeling of being hunted, watched, but worse than that. He hated feeling irrelevant, forgotten, replaceable. That night, unable to sleep, he poured himself a plastic cup of whiskey from the guest house mini-fridge. It burned, but at least it dulled the roar of panic climbing up his throat. He turned on the TV for background noise, anything to distract him. But there was no escape. Every channel had him on it. A talk show host cracked a joke about how he'd lost both his wife and his mistress in the same day. Another host praised Caroline S.'s legal brilliance, calling her a modern heroine for the modern age. Adrian watched his name morph into a punchline. He was no longer the architect. He was the wreckage. He was the warning. Sometime before dawn, he passed out in the armchair, fully clothed, the TV still flickering. His phone buzzed all night with alerts he refused to check. When he woke, the room was filled with stale air and weak morning light slipping through a gap in the curtains. The weight of it all returned heavier now, somehow, after even a few hours of broken sleep. Then came another knock. He approached the door slowly this time. It wasn't a delivery. It was a local journalist. Mid-30s, polite but firm, Mr. Colburn. "Just a moment of your time," the man said, holding up a tablet. "Caroline Colburn is holding a press conference this afternoon at the resort, main hall." Adrian started to close the door, but the journalist added quietly, "This story isn't going anywhere, sir. You might want to be ready." He shut the door. Hard. For a few seconds, he stood frozen. Then something clicked inside him. If Caroline wanted a fight, she'd get one. She could freeze his assets, humiliate him on the front page, and take away everything, but he still had something left. Pride. And pride could be weaponized. He'd done it before. he could do it again. Or so he told himself. The resort gleamed in the late afternoon light. Villa Istra's glass facade caught the sun like fire and crystal. Golden rays spilled across the lawns and rooftops, bathing the scene in glory. The pool deck had been cleared, the flower beds freshly trimmed. Staff lined the walkway in crisp uniforms, silent and sharp. The scent of orchids floated on the wind, mingling with salt air and something else anticipation. A velvet rope had been set up outside the main entrance, and beyond it, the crowd had gathered. Dozens of journalists, photographers, some in polo shirts and sun hats, others in designer blazers, cameras slung over their shoulders like weapons of choice. They weren't here for a wedding. They were here for a reckoning. Camera lenses glinted under the tropical sun like watchful eyes. By morning, the whispers had become a current no one could ignore. Adrian Colburn was going to make a public statement. No one knew exactly what she'd say, but the speculation spread like wildfire. Was it legal retaliation? A formal declaration of war? A quiet warning to powerful men and polished women everywhere? All they knew was this. She had invited them. And inside a crumbling guest house not far from the resort, Adrian Colburn was coming undone. He stood at the small window, phone gripped tight in one hand, his other clenched at his side. Sweat soaked through the collar of his once crisp linen shirt. He had spent the last few hours bluffing, calling lawyers, threatening countersuits, talking big. But beneath it all, he was drowning. This press conference had thrown him off balance. Caroline wasn't just retaliating behind closed doors anymore. She was stepping into the spotlight, and every move she made felt like it had been rehearsed in advance, poised, perfect, devastating. He checked the time. Less than an hour. He had to be there. Maybe he could flip the narrative, take back the spotlight. He still had charisma. He still had the name. He was still Adrian Colburn, wasn't he? He splashed cold water on his face, straightened his collar, and ordered a cab. But when he arrived at the gates of Villa Istra, it was clear that the world had changed, and it no longer revolved around him. Security was tight. Too tight. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, glancing at a tablet before lifting his gaze. I am sorry, Mr. Colburn. You are not on the list. What? I built this place, Adrian barked. You were invited to a private meeting earlier. You declined. This is a press-only event. The list is final. I need to speak to Caroline. She is unavailable. Adrian stood frozen for a beat, then turned sharply and stormed off. His heart was thudding so loud, it drowned out the clicks of camera shutters. Reporters spotted him through the gate and rushed over. Questions flew at him. Microphones appeared from every direction. He shoved one aside, muttering a string of profanity that one camera caught in perfect clarity. That clip would go viral within the hour. Inside the main hall, however, there was only grace and stillness. Caroline stood behind a sleek podium, dressed in a cream suit that shimmered subtly against her sun-kissed skin. Her dark hair was pulled back, elegant but unfussy. She radiated composure. Her team stood nearby attorneys, PR specialists, and staff from the resort. Not a single one looked worried. The cameras flashed the moment she stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice clear and steady. I hadn't originally planned to speak publicly, but recent events have made it necessary, not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been silenced, underestimated, or thrown away. The room quieted. She continued, This resort was built using the share of my divorce settlement that I rightfully fought for. I invested not just in property, but in peace, in healing. I never intended to bring my personal life into this business. She paused, her gaze sweeping calmly across the crowd. Us. But when I discovered that my ex-husband had used our still contested marital assets to fund a luxurious honeymoon with the woman he left me for, I could not, in good conscience, stay silent. A wave of murmurs rippled across the room like thunder rolling through a storm cloud. I followed the legal channels, she said. I filed every claim properly. I froze the necessary accounts. I did what the law allows. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. And I stand here today, not to shame him, but to make something very... Caroline's voice rang through the hall, unwavering. Financial manipulation is abuse, she said. It's not just unethical, it's illegal, and I will not allow it to be normalized or hidden behind wealth and charm. More flashbulbs burst. More furious scribbles filled notepads. But Caroline didn't flinch. She lifted a folder. These are the verified financial records, audited and confirmed. They will be submitted to the appropriate authorities. What happens next is in the hands of the legal system. But for the women watching, those who've been taken advantage of, dismissed, disrespected, I want you to know, silence is not your only option. A surge of applause broke the stillness, not polite, not hesitant, but powerful. Real. Caroline let it wash over her for a moment, then continued. As for this resort, she added, a faint but unmistakable smile forming, I intend for it to become a sanctuary, not a playground for people who treat others as disposable. She paused, then delivered the finishing blow with perfect clarity. We are launching new programs to help women recover financially after divorce retreats focused on empowerment. And we were starting with a donation fund that matches the exact cost of my ex-husband's canceled honeymoon. Laughter rippled through the audience. Clapping resumed, louder this time. Cameras clicked like applause in digital form. Across town, Adrian sat in the back of a taxi, watching it all unfold on his phone. His face was pale, drained of its usual color. One hand trembled slightly as he held the screen. Caroline's voice came through, crisp, confident, unapologetic. He could barely breathe. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. You okay, man? Adrian didn't respond. What he felt wasn't a confusion or anger. It was powerlessness, and it burned. Elsewhere, in a quiet cafe tucked beneath the bougainvillea vines, Celeste sat across from a new companion, younger, sun-kissed, the influencer type, white teeth, glossy camera crew, and a following. She sipped a cocktail and casually watched the final moments of Caroline's speech on her phone. As it ended, she locked her screen and smiled slyly. Guess I married the wrong millionaire, the man chuckled. You married him? For now, she said, raising her glass. Back at Villa Estra, Caroline stepped away from the podium. Her team gathered behind her like a wave. She didn't stop to soak in the applause. She didn't need to. She had already won. In the days that followed, her speech flooded every social feed. Clips circulated. Morning shows requested interviews. Editorials praised her as a new voice of empowerment in elite spaces. She never spoke Adrian's name again. She didn't have to. The world did it for her, and not in the way he once enjoyed. He had been erased from the spotlight he once owned, replaced by a message more powerful than any brand he had built. He was no longer a mogul. He was a warning. And worse, it was only just beginning. That evening, the heat in the guest house was unbearable. Even the ceiling fan seemed ready to tear itself loose from the ceiling, rattling in protest. Adrian sat on the sagging couch, shirt half unbuttoned and sticking to his skin. The place reeked of old perfume, spoiled dreams, and the sour stench of defeat. In his hand was a glass of warm gin, not his usual drink. He preferred aged bourbon. a single sphere of crystal-clear ice. But luxury had left the building, so had control. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the press conference. He hadn't needed to. The world had said everything. The door creaked open, and Celeste stepped inside with a slow, deliberate strut that made Adrian sit up slightly, eyes narrowing. She was wearing one of the tight silk dresses he'd gifted her before the wedding, expensive, dramatic, and now oddly out of place in the dim, crumbling guest house. Her heels struck the tile with sharp clicks that echoed in the silence. A pair of sunglasses perched on her head, even though the sun had long since slipped behind the rooftops. Her expression? Unreadable, somewhere between icy indifference and quiet fury. "Where have you been?" Adrian asked, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in hours. "Out," she said flatly, tossing her purse onto the table with a dull thud. "Figured I'd to catch some air before the rest of your empire comes crashing down." Adrian let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "Glad to see you still finding time for sarcasm." Celeste turned to face him, arms crossed. "What do you want me to say? That I'm proud of you? That I am thrilled to be staying in a glorified motel while the internet tears us apart?" "I didn't ask you to stay," he snapped, rising to his feet. The heat between them ignited, unspoken resentment hanging in the air. "You could be left days ago." She laughed bitterly. "Don't pretend this wasn't supposed to be my dream too. You promised me everything, Adrian. You said I was different. You said I'd never have to worry again. That I'd be adored, pampered, photographed in front of infinity pools while the world watched in envy. And you believed that?" he scoffed, gesturing toward her. "That sits on you." "Don't you dare," she hissed, voice low and trembling. "You sold me a fantasy. You used me to rewrite the ending of your last marriage. You paraded me around like some upgrade." Her voice sharpened. "And you used me for my money. The only difference is I was honest about it." A heavy silence fell. The distant hum of mopeds drifted in through the window. The ceiling fan groaned above them, still struggling to keep turning. Celeste sat down slowly, her expression softening just enough to show fatigue. "What now, Adrian? What's the plan? Are you going to fix this, or are we just waiting for the next headline?" "I don't know," he admitted, finally sitting beside her. His voice was small. "I didn't expect her to hit this hard." "You should have," Celeste said, shaking her head. "She's not some cast-off. She's smarter than you ever gave her credit for." He exhaled slowly through his nose, biting the inside of his cheek. "I underestimated her." "No," she said. "You erased her. There's a difference. You didn't just replace Caroline. You tried to pretend she never mattered. And now, she's rewriting the story without you in it." Adrian stared down at the empty glass in his hand, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. "She called the press. She humiliated me." "She exposed you," Celeste replied simply. "There's a difference." He didn't respond. He felt hollow, like a man gutted and left behind, a shadow of who he once was. Everything felt heavier now. His name, his image, his future. "I can just stay here," Celeste said suddenly. Her voice was quieter now, but firm. "Not like this. I didn't just sign up for broke and bitter." "Then go," Adrian murmured, his voice barely audible. She turned toward him, eyes sharp. "Dawn to think you get to play the martyr. You're not the victim here. You're just the guy who finally got caught." He looked at her, really looked for the first time in days. The shine was fading from her lips. The sparkle dulled in her eyes. She wasn't the fantasy anymore. She was a reflection, a mirror held up to every truth he didn't want to face. "Where will you go?" he asked softly. "Where will you go?" Adrian asked flatly. Celeste grabbed her purse, slipping it over her shoulder. Somewhere with air conditioning, she said, her voice dry, and people who don to pretend everything is fine when their world is falling apart. She paused at the door, glancing back at him one last time. You should be careful, Adrian. The way UV lived, it catches up, and just like that, she was gone. He didn't call after her, didn't try to stop her. The truth was, he didn't even want to. She had served her purpose, just as he had once served hers. Their transaction, like so many in his life, was complete. Adrian stood and poured the last of the warm gin down the sink. The clear liquid spiraled away, disappearing like the life he once believed was untouchable. There had to be a way out of this. There always was. A reversal, a new angle, a door, somewhere, still left unlocked. He was Adrian Colburn. After all, the man who built an empire from nothing. But as night draped itself over the horizon and the first stars blinked into view, his confidence began to fray strand by strand. He made calls. No one answered. Old allies who once leapt to take his calls now let them ring into silence. One replied via automated message, currently re-evaluating professional affiliations. Best of luck. He slammed the phone down harder than necessary. Email? Still locked. He tried logging into his company portal. Access denied. A red banner across the screen. Executive privileges suspended pending internal review. His own company, his legacy, was now closing ranks without him. And by midnight, the final blow landed. A headline, bold and merciless, flashing across his screen from the same media outlet that once fawned over his fairy tale wedding. Colburn empire crumbles. Ex-wife exposes the luxury lies. The article was surgical. It picked apart his finances. Listed every extravagant event. Engagement party, wedding, honeymoon paid for with marital assets during active divorce proceedings. It quoted Caroline S. speech. Featured photos of Celeste walking out of the guest house. Included leaked footage of him snarling at reporters through the resort gates. But it was the final paragraph that chilled him. A quote from someone on his own board. We support accountability at all levels. The company will continue to operate with integrity. All executive conduct is under review. Adrian lowered the phone, fingers trembling. This wasn't just a scandal. It was obliteration. His business, his name, his identity, all unraveling. And he couldn't stop it. All he could do was watch. He sank back onto the couch, the worn cushion sagging under his weight. Above him, the ceiling fan spun in slow, useless circles, just moving the same dead air around, over and over. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant hills. A storm was coming, but Adrian didn't hear it. He was too lost in memory, replaying every decision that had led to this moment. The lies, the pride, the blind belief that he was untouchable. Now in the dark, with no wife, no wealth, and no one left to call, he faced a truth he'd spent years denying. He wasn't in control anymore. Caroline was, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea what she would do next. Adrian Colburn had always believed in forward momentum. Keep moving. Dawn to look back. Dawn to dwell. But now there was nowhere forward left to go, only down. Regret had always felt, to Adrian, like a weakness reserved for lesser men. Men who lacked the guts to chase ambition. Men who couldn't make the hard calls, who didn't know how to cut ties and climb higher. He had worn detachment like armor steel-plated, airtight, and custom fit. But now lying flat on a lumpy borrowed mattress in a dim guest house that smelled faintly of mold and cheap soap, staring up at a cracked ceiling, Adrian felt it for the first time. Regret, slow, creeping, A poison, not all at once, but drip by drip. He hadn't truly slept in days. Not since Caroline walked into that lobby, with the composure of a queen and a folder full of calculated, quiet retribution. The ceiling fan creaked overhead, struggling against the humid air. The only light came from a pale sliver of moonlight, slipping through the blinds, soft and indifferent. Adrian turned toward it, and without intending to, his mind reached backward years, maybe more. This time, he didn't fight it. He remembered her laugh first, not the one the world knew now, the sharp, practiced smile for cameras. The other one. The one she used when they stayed up late, eating cold pizza straight from the box, talking about impossible dreams and half-baked business ideas. Back then, she wanted to start a nonprofit for underprivileged girls. He had laughed and said, "I'll fund it once I close my third real estate deal." She had laughed too, but then added softly, "I don't want your money. I want you to believe in something that's not about numbers." He remembered oversized sweaters, messy buns, bare feet dancing in their tiny apartment kitchen while she stirred pasta and hummed off-key. He remembered thinking, this is what luck feels like. But then success came, and with it, change. With every new deal, every zero added to his accounts, Caroline faded in his life, from partner to prop, from voice to echo. He stopped hearing her, and she, with quiet devastation, stopped trying to be heard. His mistakes hadn't started with Celeste. They started the first time he canceled dinner because an investor had invited him to an exclusive poker night. They deepened when he told Caroline to stop worrying about things she didn't understand. They became unforgivable the night she found that message from his assistant, from Celeste. It wasn't explicit. Not quite. But it hinted too much, and Caroline had stood by the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just tell me the truth, Adrian. I can take the truth." All he had said was, "Does it matter?" That was the moment she stopped crying. That was the moment she stopped looking at him like a man she loved and started seeing a stranger in his place. The divorce didn't come immediately. But the exit? The emotional one? It happened right there. He rolled over on the bed now, groaning under the weight of memory. He didn't want it, but it came anyway. The boardroom jokes, where he'd referred to his wife like she was some outdated model he'd traded in. The cocktail parties, where he'd introduced Celeste as his upgrade with a wink that made even his closest partners uncomfortable. And the smug, self-satisfied smirk he wore while signing the divorce papers, because he got to keep the penthouse. He thought she walked away with just a check. Turns out she walked away with something far more powerful. Now she owned a resort. Now she had the media on her side. Now the world called her an icon. And he? He was the footnote, the cautionary tale. The man who thought he'd won until she rewrote the ending. He was no longer the mogul. He was the man who used joint marital funds to bankroll a honeymoon with his mistress. That version of the story had carved itself into the internet, beyond his reach, beyond any PR team's ability to erase or rebrand. It would live there forever, a permanent echo. Adrian sat up in bed, restless, then wandered toward the window. Outside, the street was deserted, just a cat weaving through shadows and the occasional flare of passing headlights. The silence gnawed at him. He missed the rhythm of city life, the background thrum of deals being made and money moving like blood through veins. Here, all he had were his thoughts, and they were loud. His phone blinked to life again, 10% battery. He scrolled through his contacts. So many names, familiar faces, people who used to jump when he called. Now, nothing. He hovered over Caroline's name more than once. His thumb trembled just above the call button. What would he even say? I'm sorry, you win. He wasn't sure if she'd answer. Hang up, laugh. In the end, he didn't call. Instead, he opened a message from Mason, one of his oldest friends, someone who knew him before the money, before the headlines. A text from 2 days ago blinked on the screen. You sure about this marriage, man? You're playing a dangerous game. Adrian had never responded. Now he typed back, slowly. You were right. He hit send. The message status changed. Read. And then, nothing. Even Mason had nothing left to say. Adrian tossed the phone on the nightstand, rubbed both hands over his face, whispered into the empty room, I screwed up. It was the first time he said it out loud. The next morning, he walked down to a quiet cafe tucked between weathered storefronts, hoodie pulled low over his face, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. He ordered a black coffee and slid into the furthest table near the back, away from the windows. He didn't want to be recognized, not by tourists, not by locals, and maybe not even by himself. At a nearby table, a group of travelers laughed softly, speaking in Spanish. He couldn't follow the conversation, but he caught one name clearly. Caroline. He looked up. One of the women was playing a clip of the press conference on her phone. They were smiling, admiring her. One of them even raised her coffee cup and toasted, Para Caroline. He looked away, jaw tightening. She was no longer just a woman. She was a symbol, and symbols dawned to fade easily. His coffee was bitter. Or maybe that was just him. That afternoon, he wandered the beach alone, his feet sinking into the hot sand. The surf crashed in rhythmic defiance beside him. Around him, the world moved on. Families laughed. Couples strolled hand in hand. Tourists took selfies against the endless ocean. Life didn't pause for his downfall. It simply carried on. He found a smooth rock near the shore and sat down, staring out at the horizon. A yacht drifted lazily in the distance, gleaming white under the sun. For a fleeting moment, he imagined himself on it, laughing, drink in hand, Celeste beside him, Caroline a distant shadow, invisible in the rear-view mirror of his life. But even in fantasy, it shattered. Because now, even in his own mind, Caroline was there, not vengeful, not angry, just calm, watching from the shoreline, unbothered, untouchable. She had taken the wreckage and built something from it, and he had taken gold and turned it into sand. The tide crept closer, swirling around his shoes. He didn't move, let it rise, let it soak him. Maybe it would wash away the pieces of the man he used to be. Maybe it would peel back the illusion he had clung to like armor. Maybe it would leave him with something clearer. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in years, he wasn't pretending to know. But for once, Adrian was beginning to understand why that terrified him. Because when you strip away the noise, money, fame, women, distractions, you are left with the one thing most men like him are afraid to face: yourself. Elsewhere, Caroline Colburn stood in her office at Villa Estra. The balcony doors were open, letting in a soft sea breeze that curled through the room like ribboned silk. Light filtered through sheer curtains, casting shadows that danced gently across the hardwood floors. Outside, the infinity pool shimmered under a flawless sky. Guests laughed over brunch at the Terrace Cafe. A string quartet played softly beneath a white canopy. It looked like paradise, and in many ways it was. But for Caroline, paradise wasn't to the view. It was this moment, the stillness after the storm, the quiet that comes after a checkmate. She moved gracefully through the space, heels tapping softly, eyes scanning the neatly arranged folders on her desk, each document a thread in the web she had spent months weaving with care. Her assistant, Marisol, entered the room with 2 iced coffees and a tablet tucked beneath her arm. Caroline took 1 coffee with a faint smile and gestured toward the nearby seat. Updates? She asked, without slowing her pace. Marisol tapped her screen. We've received 2 new partnership requests this morning, one from a Women's Financial Literacy Foundation, the other from a legal advocacy group. Both want to collaborate on the retreat program you proposed. Caroline nodded, calm and satisfied. Good. Schedule calls with both. I want this mission to have credibility. Substance. This isn't a just PR. Marisol grinned. That's obvious. You've built something real here, Caroline. People are noticing. Caroline didn't respond immediately. She walked to the window and gazed out at the ocean, arms crossed. Her expression softened, but didn't waver. Then she spoke lower now, more deliberate. I didn't start this to punish Adrian. Not exactly. I started it to prove something. To myself, that I could exist without him, that I could thrive. She paused, then continued. The media loves the revenge story. But the truth is, the only person I ever needed to beat was the woman I used to be when I was with him. Marisol's voice was gentle. And the woman you are now? She doesn't need to win. She just needs to build. The words landed. The wind stirred a few loose papers on the desk, and Caroline reached to anchor them with one hand. Her gold bracelet caught the sunlight as she did. She turned back toward Marisol. I want the first Women's retreat scheduled for the end of next month, 3 days. Full programming workshops on asset protection, legal rights, rebuilding after betrayal. Got it, Marisol said, already typing. I will put together a speaker list. Find someone who has walked through fire, Caroline added, and come out clean. Understood. Caroline paused, then added, also reach out to our legal team. I want to follow up on Adrian's case. The public story may be over, but the real work is making sure it sticks. Marisol hesitated. You think you'll fight it? Caroline exhaled slowly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Of course, men like him always do. But fighting takes energy, and right now he is out of steam, out of allies, out of leverage. She looked back out the window, the ocean still stretching endless before her. He'll swing once or twice more, she said softly, then fade into whatever left of his legacy. She crossed the room again, her steps measured, deliberate. On the wall behind her desk hung a single black and white photograph, her and Adrian, years ago, standing in front of their very first apartment. They looked young, ambitious, slightly foolish. She hadn't kept the photo out of sentiment. It was a reminder of where she started and how far she'd come. Caroline stared at it for a long moment before gently removing it from the hook. She placed it face down in the drawer. That chapter was closed. Downstairs in the cafe, 2 women sat with cappuccinos and open laptops, mid-conversation. One pulled up a video and turned her screen toward the other. Caroline's face appeared elegant, composed, her voice playing through the speakers. This isn't about vengeance, she said on screen. It's about power, reclaiming it, redistributing it, teaching women how to hold it. She is incredible, the woman whispered, awe in her tone. Can you imagine doing all that after your marriage blows up? Not just doing something, the other said, building an empire from the ashes. Back upstairs, Caroline sat across from Evelyn. Her financial advisor, a sharp, silver-haired woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Evelyn tapped her tablet, graphs and charts blinking to life. Our Q2 revenue is up 23% since last week, and the foundation, Women Reclaiming Wealth, has already received over $150,000 in direct donations. Caroline nodded. We'll match it. From the resort's profits. Evelyn looked up, surprised. Are you sure? That is a substantial pledge. I'm sure, Caroline replied without hesitation. This resort was never meant to be just about luxury. It's a symbol And symbols only matter if they serve someone else. She glanced at the muted screen on the wall, where a financial news ticker crawled across the bottom. Langford Holdings CEO under investigation. She didn't react. No smile. No satisfaction. She simply turned off the screen with the remote. Evelyn leaned back. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've worked with dozens of clients post-divorce, but no one's ever done what you are redoing. You are not just surviving, Caroline. You are redefining what comes next. Caroline let the words settle in the space between them. Then she spoke, soft but certain. That's the point. I want women to stop asking, how do I get through this? And start asking, what can I build from this? Outside, the sky melted into soft orange. The sun dipped slowly behind the horizon, washing the balcony in gold. From where she stood, Caroline watched as guests gathered for evening cocktails on the terrace below. Somewhere nearby, someone played soft jazz on a saxophone. She lifted her coffee to her lips, breathing in the scent, before sipping. It tasted calm, earned. Marisol stepped onto the balcony, holding a printed document. One more thing, she said, hesitating slightly. A local paper wants to do a feature. Not about Adrian, about you. Your mission, your story. She handed her the headline draft. Queen of the Comeback. Caroline smiled. Just a little, and shook her head. No more headlines about revenge, she said. If they want to talk, they'll do it on my terms. This isn't about a man anymore. She paused, voice quiet. It never was. Marisol nodded and made a note. Understood. Caroline turned back toward the sea, the sun slipping behind the waves, and for the first time in a long, long while she stood in the quiet. Without needing to explain it, the heat of the day had faded, giving way to the gentle hush of dusk. On the balcony of Villa Estra, Caroline stood still, letting the sea air press against her skin like a balm, and then something inside her chest eased. It wasn't pride. It wasn't to triumph. It was peace. She had turned her pain into a blueprint, her humiliation into structure, her silence into a megaphone. And the most powerful part? She was just getting started. Thousands of miles away, the airport pulsed with motion travelers dragging suitcases, announcements blaring overhead, departure boards flickering like digital prayer wheels. Adrian Colburn stood at the center of it all, utterly out of place. His clothes hadn't seen a press in days. His hair was unkempt, his face pale, drawn tight around the edges, his jaw clenched hard, holding back the last pieces of composure. He carried nothing. His leather duffel had been stolen 2 nights ago from the guest house. He hadn't replaced it. He had only his phone, his passport, and a withering scrap of pride unraveling more with every hour. He was supposed to be on a flight back to New York, back to the city where he once mattered, back to his lawyers, to the boardrooms, to the illusion of power. The airline clerk had just confirmed his reservation was still valid, paid weeks ago, back when he still believed this trip would be his victory lap. It was the first flicker of hope he'd had in days, but just as he stepped toward the security checkpoint, 2 men in navy blue uniforms approached. Mr. Adrian Colburn? One of them asked, tone firm but courteous. Adrian froze. Yes, we have been asked to inform you that your departure has been temporarily suspended under court instruction. Your passport has been flagged. What? His voice cracked. Flagged for what? We are not authorized to discuss the details, the man replied. You will need to speak to your legal counsel. Adrian stood there, stunned. The men stepped back, gesturing for him to exit the line. People began to stare. Phones were raised, and humiliation burned up his neck like wildfire. Without a word, Adrian turned and stormed out of the terminal, his shoes slapping against the polished floor. Outside, the heat hit him like a slap. Brutal, unforgiving. The sunlight seemed to expose every inch of him he'd tried to cover up with tailored shirts and forced smiles. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking, called his lawyer, voicemail. He called someone else a backup attorney, a man he hadn't spoken to since the early years of his career. A man who once toasted his CEO promotion over $400 whiskey. This time, someone answered. Colburn, the voice said, clipped and cold. My passport was flagged. Why? A pause. Then, you haven't seen the latest court filing? No. I've been busy, the man finished dryly. There's a temporary injunction. Caroline S. team filed an emergency motion citing you as a potential financial flight risk. The court granted it. Adrian felt the world tilt. There's a hearing scheduled to determine whether you will be allowed international travel during the investigation. This is insane, Adrian snapped. She's treating me like a fugitive. Well, the lawyer said, carefully, given the timing, the funds used, and the fact that you tried to leave without court approval, you're not exactly making your case easy. I wasn't running, Adrian hissed. I was trying to go home. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, colder than before. Maybe it's time to stop calling New York home. That penthouse? It's not yours anymore. The line went dead. Adrian stared at the screen. He hadn't even been given the chance to yell. By the time he made it back into town, dusk had descended. The sky sagged with thick clouds, dark and pregnant with rain. Everything looked like it was holding its breath. So was he, because the storm was no longer coming. It had already begun. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Adrian Colburn climbed the worn steps of the guest house. The soles of his once expensive shoes were peeling at the edges. His stride, once purposeful, now dragged. The owner, a quiet, graying woman who had long since stopped making eye contact, stood in the doorway with an envelope in hand. This came for you, she said, voice flat. He took it without a word and walked back into the room. The envelope bore the name of his holding company. Inside was a formal letter on crisp stationery, the header stark and corporate. Effective immediately, the board has voted to relieve Mr. Adrian Colburn of all executive duties, pending the outcome of ongoing legal investigations. The company will proceed under interim leadership. No phone call, no conversation, no dignity. Just ink and paper. Final. Cold. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and let the letter slide from his fingers. Outside, rain began to tap against the window, soft at first, then steadily harder, like nature itself had something to say. His phone buzzed. Again. He didn't look at it. He didn't have to. Every notification was the same now. Headlines, updates, speculation. Still, he opened one. From Millionaire to Meltdown, the Adrian Colburn collapse. The article detailed everything. Every misstep, every rumor, every quote from anonymous friends who now spoke of him in past tense. Caroline was portrayed as composed, strategic, dignified. Adrian, reckless, vain, a man who authored his own destruction. And worst of all, it was all true. He tried to tell himself this would pass. Scandals fade, reputations can be bought back, but this felt different. This felt permanent, a slow, public unraveling that no amount of PR or spin could undo. The rain intensified, tapping in steady rhythms. Adrian walked to the window and leaned his forehead against the cool glass. He watched the droplets trail down like slow, reluctant tears. For the first time in years, he felt something raw, not the loss of money, not even power, but the loss of what he had thrown away. Not stolen, not taken, given up. The marriage, the respect, the empire, all built on a foundation so fragile, it barely needed a storm. Just one wrong step. And Caroline, patient and razor-sharp, hadn't pushed. She had simply waited for the collapse. In the bathroom, he stared at his reflection. It startled him. He looked older, hollow, a man who had aged a decade in a week. The arrogance that once sparkled in his eyes was gone, replaced by something brittle. He splashed water on his face, bracing against the sink, as if gripping himself into existence. A knock came from downstairs. He ignored it. Then it came again. With effort, he descended the stairs and opened the door. A young journalist stood in the rain. Local, polite, hopeful. "Mr. Colburn, would you be open to an exclusive, your side of the story? To clarify things?" Adrian stared at him, soaked from head to toe. Recorder in hand like a weapon, too polite to wound. "I don't have a story anymore," he muttered. "Just a mess." The journalist hesitated. Adrian stepped back, then closed the door gently, not slamming it. Not this time. Just closing it. He walked back to the bed and collapsed onto it, fully clothed, stared at the ceiling as thunder cracked overhead. This wasn't the beginning of the storm anymore. It was the center, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. His thoughts wandered, to the beach, to her, to the night they signed the divorce papers. She had said it softly, not angry, not even bitter, just certain. "You will see what you gave up, not all at once, but piece by piece." And now the pieces were gone. The wealth, the image, the wife, the mistress, the business, the future, all gone. All that remained was Adrian Colburn alone, and finally, for the first time in his life, no longer untouchable. The sun hung low over the ocean like a fading lantern, casting long amber shadows across the sand that curved gently around Via Estra, as if cradling the property in a soft embrace. A light breeze swept through the resort, carrying the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus. The tall palms rustled. White curtains along the terrace swayed like silk in the wind. It was a moment of stillness, not one that asked for attention, but one that simply was. Present, quiet, whole. Caroline sat facing the sea, barefoot, legs curled beneath her, in a rattan chair. A soft linen shawl rested over her shoulders. A cooling mug of chamomile tea cupped in her hands. She wasn't thinking about court filings, or asset spreadsheets, or occupancy rates, or headlines, and she wasn't thinking about him. Not really. Not anymore. He was still there, somewhere like a painting in the corner of memory, but one she no longer dusted, no longer turned to. She had learned, some people dawn to vanish. You just stop letting them live rent-free in your mind. The waves whispered to the shore, steady and unhurried, a rhythm older than every broken promise, every betrayal, every name in a scandal. Behind her, the resort murmured with quiet joy, guests laughing softly over wine, the clink of cutlery, footsteps on warm stone pathways. She had built this, not just the walls or the ocean view suites, but the purpose. She had turned what once felt like ruins into roots, a hollowed-out version of herself rebuilt, solid, sure, and finally, at peace. Her phone buzzed once on the table beside her, a voicemail. The name on the screen made her still, Adrian Colburn. She didn't take a rush, didn't to reach for it right away. Instead, she stared at the name for a few long seconds, then picked up the phone lightly, loosely, and set it back down. She could listen. She could let him speak. But what would be the point? She already knew the script: regret, a plea, an apology in disguise, or worse, manipulation wrapped in vulnerability. She knew every layer, every note of the voice that once melted her and now meant nothing. The wind picked up. lifted strands of her hair. The moment lingered. Then, without ceremony, she picked up the phone again. Not to listen, but to delete. With one swipe, the message disappeared. And just like that, so did he. Later, as dusk folded into twilight, Caroline rose. She walked back inside, her shawl trailing behind her, like the whisper of an old life she no longer carried. The main lobby was bathed in warm golden light. A few guests lingered at the bar, chatting softly over cocktails. She passed them quietly, not needing attention, content with her own presence. She stopped briefly at the concierge desk. "Thank you," she said gently, smiling at the staff. "Another smooth day." They nodded with appreciation. She continued toward her office, her heels clicking softly against the marble floors, confident, unhurried. On her desk was a simple white envelope, handwritten. Inside, a note from a woman in her 60s, a recent divorcee. "Thank you," the note read, "for creating a space where I felt like more than what I lost, for reminding me that healing isn't a whisper, it's a voice." Caroline closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting those words settle. And when she opened them, she smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the press, not for the headlines, but for herself. Someone's ex-wife. That's how some still referred to her. But as Caroline Colburn sat with the note in her hand, written in grateful script by a woman finding her way back to herself, she smiled, touched. These were the reasons she had done it all. Not the headlines, not the applause, but the quiet affirmations, the real stories of women rebuilding. She rose and walked to the small stereo near the window, turning it on. Soft jazz flowed into the room, slow, unhurried, gentle, the kind Adrian used to tease her for, saying it was music that went nowhere. But that's what she loved about it. It didn't push, it didn't demand, it simply was. She sat back at her desk, leafing through notes for next month retreat, when a voice called softly from the doorway. "Thought I might find you here." It was Marisol, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You're supposed to be off," Caroline said, smiling. "I know, but I figured you'd still be working," Marisol replied. "I brought reinforcements." They settled in together, watching the last light drain from the horizon, sipping quietly as the sky darkened into velvet. "Do you think he'll bounce back?" Marisol asked after a while. Caroline shrugged, setting her glass down. "He always does. That's his gift." She paused, then added, "But maybe this time he'll learn something from it. Or maybe he won tea." A soft smile. "Either way, it's not my concern anymore." Marisol nodded. "You really let it go, didn't you?" "I had to," Caroline said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness wasn't tea for him, it was for me." Outside, the resort came alive, under soft lights, pathways glowing like threads of gold, trees swaying gently, laughter rising from the bar like the sound of healing. It wasn't just a resort. It was hers, and it was alive. Caroline walked Marisol to the door, pausing for a moment to gaze at the stars now beginning to scatter across the sky. "Everything changes eventually," she murmured. "Even the things we thought were permanent." "Even him?" Marisol asked gently. Caroline smiled. "Especially him." After Marisol left, Caroline stepped back onto the balcony. Alone beneath the open sky, she closed her eyes. The breeze touched her arms, cooled her skin, stirred her hair. She inhaled deeply, and exhaled not as a woman who had escaped something, but as one who had arrived. No headlines, no victory speech, just silence and peace. Far away, in a windowless office in New York, Adrian Colburn sat under fluorescent lights, answering questions from lawyers, struggling to stitch together the remains of a reputation he had shaved, worn a tie, forced to smile in rooms that once bent around his ambition. But something had shifted. People no longer paused when he entered. They didn't to defer. They simply noted him and moved on. That evening, he returned to the penthouse, or what used to be his. The furniture was gone. The walls echoed. Boxes lined the hallway. Legal notices piled unopened on the counter. He poured a drink, but didn't sip it. Instead, he walked to the window and sat down, staring out at the skyline. Once he believed he owned that view. Now it stared back at him unmoved. In his chest, something stirred. Not pain, not rage, something quieter. Emptiness. And in that silence, he finally heard the words she had said to him once long ago, after the papers were signed. I hope you learn to live without needing to win. Caroline had let go. She had rebuilt. She had bloomed in the ruins, and Adrian, he was still holding the pieces, still trying to win, and he had no idea how to let go. But somewhere, between the silence and the weight of the skyline, a space was opening. A small, tender place where regret could soften, and maybe one day he could begin again. Because healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes quietly in letting go. Thank you for being here, for listening with your hearts, for making space for stories that speak softly, and for letting us remind you that healing is not always loud. Every view, every share, every comment means more than words can express. Together we are building a place where truth is honored, resilience is celebrated, and where the quiet strength of starting over is never underestimated. This story may have come to an end, but we hope its message stays with you in the moments you feel lost, and in the ones where you finally find yourself again. With gratitude, the Shining Stories team.